Excellent. Okay, well, I've got 10:33, so let's call this meeting to order. We're going to skip over the introductions because it's a virtual meeting. And let's start with the safety moment by Rob.
All right, so anybody who's attended these regional meetings in the past is used to seeing our safety moment videos. This is a continuation of the series that we've been working on with Rosano in around the musculoskeletal injury prevention. So here's a quick one on how to safely move dollies, but even if you're not moving dollies, the basic mechanics for moving any kind of weight still stay in place. So just let me know if we've got audio when I go to run this, because I'm never ever sure if we've turned the audio on, because I click it, but let's see. Just give me a thumbs up. I'm presuming we have audio.
Moving dollies can be done easily if the right tools are used. No, not that kind of dolly. Before taking on any physical activity, basic stretches can help warm up muscles and joints. In a perfect world, moving a dolly with a tractor and placing it exactly where you need it is the best bet. It's the safest for you and easiest on your body. However, the world isn't always perfect, and sometimes you need to move the dolly manually. In this case, using the proper tools will make the job easier. Use the proper stance, place your feet roughly shoulder width apart and brace with one foot ahead of the other. Push using your legs, not your back. The longer the pry bar, the more leverage possible. It's like using a breaker bar instead of a stubby wrench. Some jobs require additional help. Getting a buddy to help move something heavy will reduce the effort and chance of muscle strain. Manually moving a tandem converter is not a task you should take on though. The higher weight makes it very difficult to move with muscle power alone. Reposition the tractor instead. Don't risk an unnecessary strain or sprain when there's equipment better suited to the job or a safer way to do it.
So that was just a pretty straightforward, simple one for those people who like to pick things up and put things down. Remember, it's all about the technique.
Outstanding. Thanks, Rob. Okay, do we have any additions and deletions to the agenda? Andy, you're going to put in 12.01?
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yes, if we could add in 12.1, please, which would be vaccination, international U.S. destinations, as well as domestic. And 12.2, which is going to be handled by Rob on the federal labor code around sick time.
Excellent. Thanks, Andy. Any other additions or deletions? Hearing none, can I get approval of the agenda, please?
Robin here, I'll approve the agenda.
Thanks, Rob. In a second.
Bonnie, I'll second.
Thanks, Bonnie. Okay, Andy will do a review of the CRA action items, please.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. So the first action item we have was I was supposed to send out the Alberta Safety Fitness Certificate Renewal link, which was sent out to the committee. Number 2 was reviewing the pulsating yellow to red brake light video with Andrew Pillman, the Director of Permitting and Approvals, which was completed as well too. And number 3 was a federal labor overview when it comes to overtime payments and stuff like that. So a summary of those examples were provided to the group as well. On the update, we also had our bulletin on the safety fitness certificate. So all of the action items were completed there, Mr. Chair.
Outstanding. Thanks, Andy. Okay, then we'll move on to the government update. Alberta Transportation, Malcolm.
Malcolm, you
morning, everyone.
There we are. Thanks, Malcolm.
Malcolm Mullen, Director of Compliance and Oversight for Alberta Transportation. I'll just be very brief with a quick update on electronic logging devices. Alberta's tentative plan back in the spring, early summer, was to look at beginning soft enforcement here in December. That has changed since the amount of devices certified for use in Canada is so limited. We are up to 12 now, and I will attach the link to the list from Transport Canada in the chat. Should be there now. So we're up to 12, which is positive. I don't know what the magic number is going to be, but the rest of the country, including Transport Canada and Alberta, is looking at beginning enforcement now in June of 2022. So no written warnings, no verbal lashings, no demerit points, no tickets, no summons, no nothing until June 2022. So that is the latest and greatest. And I will open it up for questions now because I actually have to leave fairly shortly. So any questions?
Malcolm, actually, I got one. I was chatting with the carrier yesterday, and we had a good conversation when it come to crane operators and shutdowns and things like this, and some of the predicament that they might face coming up. Do you have any experience with the federal process for exemptions, and/or do you have that link? I believe there is a link that people have to follow when they're looking at processing or requesting a possible exemption when it comes to the new federal hours of service and the ELD requirements. And I hopefully didn't get you off guard there with that, and if you don't, that's cool. I'm digging with the CTA right now.
Yeah, that's no problem. I'm compliance and oversight, so I just regulate what is required, and if somebody produces a permit, then I have to accept it. Andrew Pillman from licensing and approvals is the registrar in regards to federal hours of service permit issuance. So I will get that to you, Andy, so that you can distribute that link, and we can invite them to the next meeting if we want to go that way. Or the link probably has all the information we need to decide whether or not we need a conversation or not.
Perfect. And if we could mark that down as an action item for myself, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks, Malcolm.
Yep.
We'll get it out later.
I have a question. Malcolm.
Yep. Fire away.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm, Malcolm, what you were saying there. So that means not as of December 1st or January 1st, no CVSAs or anybody, DOTs are going to say or request anything about the ELDs until June of 2022. They won't even bring it up or nothing or anything.
Well, you're still required to produce record of duty status, right? So if you are currently running an ELD and that's your record of duty status, well then yes, you're going to have to produce it. But the requirement to install, operate, and produce information from a certified ELD device in Canada will not be enforced until June 2022. Does that make sense? Like, you can produce paper logs right now if you're required to run a logbook. If you're running an electronic logging device because you run in the States and you just have one and that's your record of duty status, well, yeah, you're going to have to produce it through that means then, or paper, whichever you have.
Okay, thank you very much.
Looks like I got back on just in time. Any other questions for Malcolm? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the Sheriff's Highway Patrol. Dan McCormick. Thanks, Malcolm.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Dan McCormick with Sheriff High Patrol, the inspector. I'll just give a quick update on behalf of Deputy Chief Andrews. So on November 26, we had a swearing in ceremony. We have a new chief sheriff in our organization. His name is Mr. Farouk Sheikh, and he has about 28 years of previous law enforcement experience. The majority of that is in England, actually. But a lot of his background is specialized in traffic. So he's pretty well versed, even though it's over the pond. He's pretty well versed on what we do in traffic. So it'd be a huge help to us in our organization. Yeah, so just moving on here, we're just going through a competition right now for laterals and promotions for our sergeant rank. And then we're hopeful here come 2022 that we're going to be able to run a class of recruits. Currently in the province, we're probably running over 35 vacancies. We're just working out a new curriculum because it's going to be an amalgamation of the former sheriff traffic operations and commercial vehicle enforcement. As we had merged, the new officers that'll be coming into the field will be trained in both, so they'll have to amalgamate the current curriculum and make it one for next year. And then that'll include as well as a lot of our new rapid responsibilities that we've taken on as well in the last year. And just kind of leading into those new responsibilities that we're doing with rapid, as of December 9th, the last tally of numbers here, we have had 1,773 contraventions within safe roads. So those are over 1,700 administrative penalties for either anything from impaired driving, from having cautions fails, to suspended drivers, IRS 0 contraventions as well. So it's a pretty good number for the last 12 months. We're also just finishing up some of our level 2 collision investigation. We have a class actually going on this week at Atmore. And then we also have 2 more classes in January 2022 to finish up. And while we're doing all of the extra duties, we're still doing our regular duties of commercial vehicle enforcement. I can just give you some stats quickly from January 1st until the end of November. So for 11 months in 2021, we've had 6,916 level 1 inspections completed with 2,683 out of service. So we have a out of service rate of 39%. We have our level 1 for school buses. We've done 650 of those in the province, and 52 of those were placed out of service. So that works out to be about 8%. Level 2s, we've done 9,474 with an out of service of 4,293, which works out to about 45% out of service rate. And for our level 3s, we've done 1,911 over that period with 203 out of service. So that works out to about 11%. So overall, our numbers, we're not doing too bad considering we've taken, again, a lot of training, and COVID obviously hasn't helped us either. So we're sitting at right now to year to date at about 18,355 Cbsa inspections for the province. And that again is just our numbers within the Sheriff Highway Patrol. We also have other agencies that are doing inspections throughout the province as well, right? For our municipalities like Edmonton Police Service and Calgary Police Service. And those numbers aren't included in that. That's just our own numbers. And as of December 14th, we're also required to have our vaccination. So if anybody's interacting with any of our membership, we do have to have double vaccination. And if we're not, then they have to produce a negative test every 24 hours. And just to touch quickly on just with the ELDs, just exactly what Malcolm had said there, that'll probably work well into our timelines of June. We traditionally do our CVSA refreshers in April. April 1st is usually the changeover for the new out of service criteria. So our officers will go through that training. I think we really we're hopeful to get some of that training this year on our previous training, but it worked out that there just wasn't any certified ELDs to base it off of. So now there's some on the list. We'll be able to pull some of that data off and start training our officers. So when everything's implemented in June, we'll be prepared to do the same. But we're kind of in the same boat as industry, right? We're kind of waiting until everything unravels here, and it gives us an opportunity to make sure we're doing things right the first time as well. So again, we'll follow the suit with what transportation's saying of June. So other than that, I had nothing else to provide.
Hey, Dan, it's Andy Barnes. How are you today? Awesome. Hey, great statistics you had. Would you mind if I mark that down as an action item, and maybe you and I can connect and we can gather those up and put those in the minutes to go out? I think that would be really informative information there when it comes to the number of CBSAs and how things are progressing. I think it's really great to see that bringing on officers now and looking at training all of them too, if I'm correct too, on the whole CBSA process. That's a fairly substantial commitment from the department to do all of that. So I commend you on that. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No, sorry, Andy, didn't mean to talk over you there. No, and I was just going to say, absolutely. I can tell you that senior leadership has realized that, you know, they're well aware of the importance of the work we do out there, and we want to continue with the numbers that we have, and of course with shared responsibilities that we're doing within the organization, we're going to need more people on the ground to get those numbers to maintain what we have. And the other thing I just want to point out real quickly, I'm sure most people are well aware, but those numbers are very high on the out of service, but I want you to understand too that, you know, those are numbers that we're pre-scanning and focusing on those vehicles and identifying which vehicles we're selecting for those inspections. So I found it interesting when I was on that panel discussion with the Western provinces that, you know, some of the agencies or jurisdictions are cautious about sharing those numbers sometimes because often it isn't a reflection of industry, right? And I don't think that is a reflection of the, you know, the standard of vehicles that are in the province. I don't want people to think that, you know, you got a 1 in 2 chance of meeting an unsafe vehicle, because I don't think that's really the case, right? We're just, honestly, I think we're really good at what we do without tooting our own horn, but we have the training and the technology to select the vehicles that we feel that are going to be unsafe to the public, and that results in a higher out of service rate than often is reflected with the industry, right?
No, I think that's great. In fact, we've got a couple minutes here, so maybe what we can do is just have a quick conversation, if you don't mind, just about that selection process, Dan. I know people are always curious. We've got a very hard stop at 11 a.m. for a federal ADM who will be speaking to our organization. So instead of trying to squeeze another topic in here, this is always a question that comes up from industry, and it's always posed to me is that, you know what, when commercial, why are they always just picking on violations? And I know you've explained this a million times, but we've got a larger group this time. And I think with the regional meeting crowd, I think it's really important to know how you're pulling the unsafe vehicles off the road first and why that's the selector now. And I think we all understand that and respect that, of course. So if you wouldn't mind kind of going over that information, and then maybe we tie in a little bit on the SRS system.
Well, ultimately, I think, you know, we have a mandate in the province, and number one, it's public safety, right? So in order to make sure the highways are safe for all road users, we're going to select the vehicles that are most unsafe to the motoring public. It's the same as with how we identify with commercial vehicle, the Cbsa program, right? Is you want to select the vehicles that are going to be at the highest risk of breaking down or due to mechanical failure or causing a collision, right? So that's our mindset on that. The other mandate we also have is protect the infrastructure. And the third thing I'd like to say is what we call the Alberta Advantage. And that's making sure it's a fair and even playing field for all of industry. So one company won't compete with another company if they don't maintain their vehicles, right? There's just no way a good company can compete with that. So we do our best to select the vehicles that are going to be at the most risk, and also those are probably the carriers that need the most attention, right? Statistically, we have 2 times a year during road check, and each district is required to do 2 surveys a year where we pull in vehicles at random. We don't select vehicles based on what their condition is, and even in our road check results, It doesn't mean we won't take an unsafe vehicle off the road, but if we identify that, it can't be part of the statistical numbers, right? So those are the times of year that we select vehicles that are next in line, and we take our numbers based on that to compare to other jurisdictions, and maybe a bit of a report card on how we're doing in the province, right? And traditionally, those numbers are always lower. They're much lower than the number we have, right? But then the other times of the year, you know, I can say as an example, there's you know, for what 23,000 carriers out there in all of the vehicles, we only have right now, we're probably sitting at about less than 200 members out there, and only probably about 100 and some are trained in CBSA. We're trying to get that number up where we do have about 247 vacancies, or sorry, 247 positions. So out of those positions, if everybody's doing CBSA, you're still putting a very small dent in that public safety mechanism, right? So you're really trying to focus on the vehicles that need the most attention. And as a result, you're going to get that. You know, we've even had, you know, when we talk about the technology we have smart roadside, we have thermal imaging. We're discussing with a DriveWise program where we're going to base it on your the risk factor that you have in the province on your rating to allow a determination as to how much of a percentage of bypass you can have. So ultimately, if you have a lower safety rating and you have a higher risk factor, you're going to come in more often than the vehicle that doesn't have a higher risk factor. So once again, it probably is going to increase the out of service rate. So I'm cautious to say that the out of service rate shouldn't always reflect industry, because it just means we're doing a better job of selecting the vehicles that we need to look at.
And that was a great explanation of it. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that, because there's always a lot of questions about that selection process. We understand it because we're always having that conversation with you. We've got a few more minutes left just prior to when Josh will take over the meeting, and then introduce our research and innovation group. So maybe we could just talk about for a section the level 8 inspection and the technology that's used when a vehicle comes into the inspection station, because that'll help when it comes to that level 8 conversation about could we have some possible credits down the road. So that's always kind of an interesting one. So if you don't mind giving us just an overview of that technology, there's about 4 minutes left or so like that, I'd appreciate it.
I'll do my very best. I can tell you I'm not in a position where I've ever operated one, right? But I've seen it in action, and ultimately, yeah, for those of you that have the opportunity to go by a vehicle inspection station like Leduc, you'll see that as you enter the runway, there's a bunch of lamps and lights and cameras and everything. And as you're running through there, it's quickly running a check your database and pulling up the licensing information. I think there's some things they've recognized as well about having front and rear plates and things like that, but it's also doing a pre-scan of the vehicle. We have thermal imaging, and again, I'm not trained in that field, but it basically detects the heat signatures, right? So it's identifying hot brakes, cold brakes, things like that. You can tell. I know in our thermal imaging that we take roadside, we have a couple vehicles that are mobile that do the same function. And again, the camera can switch back and forth from thermal imaging to the camera, and it can zoom in on vehicles, drivers, tell if drivers are wearing seatbelts, things like that, take screenshots. So that kind of technology it's costly, and it's not always user friendly as in Alberta as it maybe would be in Florida, right? So we've had our issues with some of that stuff, but and it's expensive too. We have to ask transportation. I know Patrick Fitzhenry was working on that, and I think the last cost was probably about $1 million per facility, right? So we only have 4 sites that we're trying to maintain in Alberta. Ideally, it would be great to have it at more. But yeah, that's just some of the technology we have to help utilize a level 8. A little different than the States. Again, this isn't really in my wheelhouse. I don't know why we can't get that information, but my understanding is the level 8s that happen in the States, they're also able to pull in that ELD information as well. So I don't know if that's something that would be down the road. Again, I'm not a developer for that, so it'd be great if it was, because it would be one less thing we could do at roadside versus having to pull in a driver to find out, right?
No, that's perfect. I mean, just a quick overview on the technology was great before we go into this hydrogen piece. Maybe one thing with all the snow, just a great reminder, Chris, and there's my alarm clock. So Chris reminded me, maybe we could just chat for 1 minute here as a reminder about brushing the snow on those really bad days off of the rear trailer lights. I think that's critically important so that people remember that when you're traveling in light puffy snow and things like that on days like this, that we take the time and we brush off our lights. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dan? Oh.
No, sorry, I just have to put myself back up. No, I agree 100%. And ultimately, I understand you take a day like today, it's very difficult to just stop every so many miles and do that. But it's when you have those opportunities that you take it. And I can tell you one thing, just from my perspective of 20 some years of working in a vehicle inspection station, I can always tell the true professional when they take the opportunity, when they come into a scale and they have that moment that they're safely off the highway, and they'll do that quick walk around, give the lights a quick clean, and they carry on. And you realize that, it's a safe zone for them to do that. And you can, and again, that's a hats off to those in industry that are aware of that. And it does make a difference, right?
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. I owe you lunch for putting you on the spot and helping me out with some time here.
Anytime.
I'm going to turn it over to our co-chair, Josh, if you would please, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. Great meeting so far. Appreciate it. So for research and innovation, there's some really good stuff that we're going to go through. So there's hydrogen-powered transportation projects in the Amta Roadshow with Amanda Meslek. We have the Assistant Deputy Minister, Andrew Noseworthy here, as well as Dr. David Lazzell. So Amanda, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, I absolutely will. I'm going to share my screen with everyone. Just to make sure that you're seeing what I'm seeing. So I'm Amanda, and I'm our Innovation and Research Manager here at AMTA. And really, my focus is to build out industry collaboration around technology-led initiatives, as well as bringing operational and environmental benefits to the sector as a whole. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of an update from our perspective in our industry advancement department. I'm going to focus on hydrogen because there's some really exciting initiatives and projects coming out of the department in this space. I can speak a little bit, depending on time, on some of the other technology-led projects that we're focused on. But for now, we're really going to look at hydrogen-powered transportation projects for AMTA. And, for transportation companies, unlike other organizations, there's lots of embedded emissions. And the hydrogen economy in the industry is offering a really new alternative fuel among many of the fleet owners that may be worth consideration today on the call, as well as the accelerator. And Andrew will kind of go through the position that the province is taking in terms of the fleet owners of that unique position within the hydrogen value chain. So research and innovation, we have three main hydrogen projects that we're working on. The Alberta Zero Emissions Truck Electrification, the Aztec project, which is 2 vehicles that we're building, 2 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. We have the EVID project, which is a fueling infrastructure here in Alberta. And then I'll speak a little bit more about the new projects, the hydrogen vehicle pilot program, which will be offering carriers the trial opportunity to some of this equipment that's being promoted in the industry and is being developed as a whole. To wrap it up, I'll talk a little bit more about our AMTA Roadshow, which is funded by NRC Can as well as Prairies Canada. And then, some of the other areas in the department overall is our driver's training. So it's really leading edge training for the MELT program. It's a VR simulator that we're in milestone 5 for, as well as we have some CTPS trials, so some platooning trials that we're working with Transport Canada around. So the hydrogen network as a whole is really our way of looking at the pathway to net zero emissions, and if it can be produced at a less than cost of traditional diesel while reducing our greenhouse gas impact as a sector whole. The hydrogen roadmap, which will be introduced later, expects about 10% of trucks to be converted to hydrogen fuel cells by 2030. And really what we're going to focus on is that there's lots of hydrogen supply companies in Edmonton and Alberta, and that the supply will continue to be developed. Alberta is committed to large investments provincially and federally around strategies and roadmaps to focus on the supply side, but we really want to forge this new value chain from the carrier's perspective and where we can scale up and sustaining, not just accessing public funds, but building out the business case for the freight sector and having a role at the table. AMTA is going to be focusing on the hydrogen network by giving the carriers this trial opportunity to work with the OEMs in accessing some of these vehicles and determining if the performance is there for them, as well as we're really going to focus on the data analytics as well as the learning and development side of the hydrogen space. So my focus in the department and every project that we're delivering on the new energy side is to engage members, to engage carriers, and really provide that two-way discussion around the industry innovation in this space. So we feel that the freight sector will play a key role in the hydrogen network, and really working with the Transition Accelerator and carriers, we're hoping that we can provide a robust pilot program starting in April 2022. And like I said, a big focus of this pilot program is, yes, to give the carriers the opportunity to try out these vehicles, but to build out our data at this level. So make sure we have the Alberta route conditions, so the cold weather, as well as the various factors and components within the region that makes us a little bit more specific than our eastern counterparts. So really, the focus on why hydrogen or some of the challenges is developing an economic viable system. So working with public investment to focus on capital investments and not just maintaining the vehicles and the equipment and the sensoring equipment, but looking at ways that we can produce a functional system that's viable and can be scalable for all of the members here. And we'll be looking at some of the key stakeholders in this area, not just the carriers, but the academics, the government funders, all of the transport managers as a whole. So engaging the fleet managers as well as the carriers to really break down some of these current challenges. So the cost and the availability. We're working with our Aztec project as well as the EVID project in building out the infrastructure to do these trials. And some of the pieces that we're hoping to bring to you in the roadshow is the hydrogen fuel cell. So, zero emission, only using pure hydrogen, emitting only water. We're looking at, the affordability of, 2023 all the way to 2025 of the hydrogen fuel cells, and making sure that we're releasing robust reporting in that area. And then we're also going to be looking at, the hydrogen diesel dual fuel vehicles. So giving you the opportunity to pilot both vehicles and looking at, again, the commercial availability for ordering today of the two types of vehicles, the affordability, and breaking down those challenges in terms of performance and reliability. So starting with the Aztec project, so this is something that many of you on the call are probably familiar with. This is an industry-led advanced hydrogen electric fuel cell heavy-duty truck project. So again, the fuel cell generates electricity through an electrical chemical reaction. So it's not your traditional combustion with the diesel engines. So we're combining hydrogen and oxygen to produce electricity. We heat and water, and basically we're going to be the fuel cells are very silent and they're very highly reliable. So you can think of it as an electric vehicle where you replace the battery with a fuel cell, and the electric charge used for the fuel with compresses through hydrogen gas. So we have a few project partners, and we're designing and building the 2 hydrogen fuel cell electric trucks. So they're Class 8 trucks. Initially, we're looking at 700 kilometers range, and based on some redesign, we're going to be implementing new fueling infrastructure to kind of support some trials throughout the corridors, Calgary and Edmonton. This overall is around a $16.5 million project, and it's substantially supported by ERA, Emissions Reductions Alberta. And it's really, again, to support the advancements of the hydrogen economy here in Alberta. And we're really focusing, like I said, on those factors that are unique to us in the West, which is our Canadian winters. We want to really push being globally the heavy-duty fuel cell electric commercial vehicle, and making sure we get some of those distances as well. So moving into the infrastructure development project that industry advancement is focusing on. So this is a $2.3 million project supported by Natural Resources Canada, and it's really to support Aztec as well as other hydrogen-focused projects in the province to support the advancements of the hydrogen economy through the fueling infrastructure. So this is an AMTA project, lead project for us in the area of alternative fuels. And it's something that will continue on as the ecosystem grows as a whole. So here's a bit of an Aztec and EVID progress update. So we have, again, the fueling station, the Aztec trucks, and then the hydrogen pathway. So we're really looking at combining the synergies between these projects, as well as the pilot demonstration project and the roadshow that we'll talk a little bit more for. But really what it does is it allows us all to kind of work with industry. So work with the supply side, as well as work with advancing the technology. So on the Aztec side, we're working with Ballard and Dana to really prove out the technology and build out the solution. On the pathway side, you know, we're working with universities over dual fuel and, you know, Alberta's zero emissions transit, the ASHET project. So there's a lot of collaboration in this space because in essence, the ecosystem is very young and it's kind of emerging, and there's a lot of collaboration that's needed on both the supply and the demand side. So moving into Cbsa, so this is our new project where we're really going to engage AMTA members and the carriers. The duration of this project is going to be from starting as early as January 2022 and moving into late December 2023. And we're looking at around 100 weeks of trials. So we have funding in place, as well as we have additional funding for the roadshow, so additional demonstrations, and we're really hoping to work with OEMs and build out as many vehicles in our demonstration, in our pilot project, to let carriers kind of test out the different models and different costing structures. So some of the models will have, you know, a lease versus buy costing structure, and some will provide fueling infrastructure with the lease. So we're working alongside, again, those main partners, the Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub, the Transition Accelerator. We're looking at, you know, bringing some of these different Class 8 medium duty Class 5, 6 trucks onto the pilot. So OEMs like Hyzon, Hydra, Nikola, and then the fueling station. So as of right now for 2022, they're the demonstration will be required to refuel in Sherwood Park. And then ultimately moving into 2023, there's going to be possibility to utilize mobile fueling stations. So really building out the value proposition of the, the unique routes here for the carriers in Alberta. So we're hoping to engage AMTA carriers as well as members around this demonstration. So we'll be reaching out to you, in the new year, looking for participation, doing that selection. There's going to be some costs associated to participate from the carrier's perspective, the fuel, because ideally you're just going to take on the vehicle for your operation. So for your logistics, to continue on as if it was part of your fleet. But we're hoping to have fixed pricing around that that's very comparable to diesel, if not comparable to diesel. And we're looking at least a 1 week slot. So there could be up to 100 interested members. It's still an area under review. And really the demonstration is going to focus, like I said, is on the horsepower and the performance in comparison with those traditional diesel vehicles. So just a little bit more in terms of the objectives of this program. And it's important to understand that we have basically one very large road show that we're positioning here in Alberta. So there's going to be national truck leasing operators with the carriers. There'll be maintenance involved that the OEMs will supply, as well as there'll be some, insurance pieces that we still need to work out as we take on demonstrations as early as April 2022. So AMTA will manage all the regulatory communications and the approvals, the safety and safety communications plan, as well as a lot of the education will be provided to the vehicle carriers, and that vehicle training will include, some ride along for AMTA or the OEM representatives to ensure the proper use, as well as we're going to be capturing a lot of that through our data strategy for the hydrogen plan as a whole. So just a kind of high level overview of the project benefits from the OEM, the carrier, and the Canadian's perspective. Those barriers that we're really trying to break down with this project, as well as the roadshow as a whole, is the higher costs, any unknown challenges from the carriers, the fleet manager's perspective, really focusing on the procurement of sufficient vehicles, as well as the fuel, the supply side to meet operational needs and goals. And the target is really, those heavy duty short haul, heavy duty long haul, and then the heavy duty combination short long haul pilots. So first off is having as many OEMs involved in the pilot project demonstration as possible, giving the carriers an opportunity to try out more than one vehicles within their own logistics. And then again, really focusing on the uniqueness to Canada's western route side, so the cold weather. So making sure that we have, 2022 winter or 2023 winter included in our data collection and our demonstrations. So the AMTA Hydrogen Roadshow will work with the Cbsa. The Cbsa is just the initial funding that was received, and then we have additional funding that we're hoping to receive as early as January 2022 from Prairies Can. So that's was originally Western Economic Diversification Canada, and that's funding to support additional fueling infrastructure, as well as more selection of OEMs, more roadshow events. So kind of at the beginning of a roadshow, so a beginning of a trial and the end of a trial in different community locations, just really highlighting the benefits and engaging with carriers and AMTA members, working towards things like the driver shortage. So really focusing on the technology advancements in the industry for talent management acquisition, and looking at how we're going to be a leader in terms of the training as this technology becomes adopted in the sector as a whole. So you know, those vehicle requirements. We're looking at the fit for the hydrogen fuel cell versus the dual fuel for the carriers, and really looking at that long combination vehicles. So here's a kind of overview of Zevia and all of the moving parts that will make it up. So we have the roadshow program, the technology, industry reporting. So at the end of the roadshow, we'll be producing an industry report with some of those performance indicators included, as well as the qualitative and quantitative data that's collected from the carriers around the adaptability and the feasibility of these vehicles in the sector as a whole. There's going to be lots of education that's going to be developed through these roadshow and these initiatives for the hydrogen ecosystem as a whole, and events. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. I'm a little bit over time. We, outside of that, we have the Global Hydrogen Conference coming up in 2022 that we're going to be submitting some of our projects to. So if there's an area that anyone wants to be involved in that space, make sure you reach out to Andrew, and he can link you up to me. As well as we're going to be asking for one-to-one meetings with your companies to kind of achieve these projects and garner some feedback of areas that maybe we haven't addressed in terms of challenges or next steps.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. There were 2 questions in the chat, but just due to time, if it's okay that we, if we can address those later in the meeting, would that be okay?
Yeah, no problem with that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, again, that was really good information. It's great to see, so I appreciate it. And Assistant Deputy Minister Andrew Noseworthy.
Hi, folks. I'm Andy Noseworthy. I'm the ADM responsible for clean technology and industrial decarbonization at ISED. Now, many of you may have already had established links with other federal departments like Transport Canada or NRCan, probably less likely with my department. ISED stands for Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. We're the federal industry department, and we've been given a major role in delivering the industrial elements of Canada's climate plan. In doing so, we realize we're not the technical experts in areas like transportation, energy development, or hydrogen. So we've developed really close working relationships between departments, especially departments like the Environment Department, NRCan. We're really trying to take a team-based approach. Many of you will already be familiar with the climate plan the government released about a year ago. While the environmental focus and priority of mitigating climate change was a key driver in that plan, it may not be as obvious that the plan was also really designed as an industrial policy, and it was driven by a recognition that how Canada embraces decarbonization will be a key factor in defining its future economic competitiveness. And in that way, it's what's happening around decarbonization is not unlike what's happening around digitalization in the world around us. You know, when I started meeting with companies, when I started this job a few years back, the consistent message I got was that industry saw the need to adopt and deploy clean technology and decarbonization essentially is being driven by government policy and environmental regulations. And it's interesting, you know, today that's a message I seldom hear. Things have shifted dramatically, driven by market demand for low carbon goods and also by shareholder and investor demands. And some of the things that have happened around us in the last year or two have been profound. Some of you may be aware of the fact that there was a really interesting board meeting by ExxonMobil, for example, earlier this summer, where the company almost lost control, or the board almost lost control of the company because of concerns by upstart investors around the lack of a solid net zero decarbonization strategy for the company. The Dutch courts last year issued a decision making Royal Dutch Shell liable for all of the companies in its supply chain for their emissions. And we've seen decisions over the last couple of years by BlackRock, the largest investment firm in the world, to move away from fossil fuels, and the Quebec Pension Fund recently did the same thing. And in my world, I'm seeing the trend towards decarbonization accelerate as industry looks to move past COVID and build back better. And it's being driven by the need to have a stronger, more durable industrial base going forward, and also it's, I think, a reflection on people's concerns around weather disasters, which we're seeing more frequently, and the need to build resilience into our economy. As a result, Many companies are moving to net zero emissions plans and building plans to decarbonize their operations, and it's happening really in all industries. We're seeing a rapid movement in the light-duty vehicle industry towards electric vehicles. Major work is underway with the Concrete Association of Canada, for example, and the individual cement manufacturers to radically decarbonize what's happening in that industry. Even in the fossil fuel sector, companies like Equinor are setting maximum CO2 per barrel limits on new production. And it's generally recognized that, as all of these things happen around us, it's going to require a major retooling and transformation of industrial operations. And the climate plan really provided some significant resources to support industrial transition and decarbonization. In the last year, we've had a number of very important programs on the federal side that kind of count in this space. One of them is called the Net Zero Accelerator, which has $8 billion in it, and is specifically designed to support large industrial projects that transform the industry and lower GHGs. We have $1 billion in something we haven't named yet. It has a horrible name of a blended finance facility, which is really a co-financing fund with the pension funds and others in the investment community, again, designed around large projects. Sustainable Development Technology Canada, which is an organization that's been around for a number of years, had its budget doubled in the last budget and is focusing specifically on first-of-kind demonstration projects of new technologies in this space. NRCan has its Clean Fuels Fund, $1.5 billion over 5 years, again, specifically driving change in this space. And that's just some of the bigger programs. There are a range of programs across all departments, including environment, agriculture, the Crown corporations like the Infrastructure Bank, BDC, EDC also have funding in this space. We've set up internally in the federal system a decarbonization team across departments and agencies that's proactively working with companies to identify decarbonization projects and to reach out to industry and the provinces. And that actually complements some work we've had underway for some time now through an organization called the Clean Growth Hub, which is an organization that has 16 federal departments and agencies co-located in one place, helping SMEs navigate through the federal system where they need support and assistance. And we've got about 2,500 clients in the Clean Growth Hub at this point in time. While it's still early days across all industries, it's clear that two major technologies are having the potential to be major game changers. One is CCUS and the other is hydrogen. And we're already seeing early ideas for hydrogen projects in Alberta. You might have noted, for example, that the Pathways group around the oil sands has indicated an interest in engaging in hydrogen. And really across the country, we're seeing quite a significant number of projects. My challenge when I look at those projects, most of them are focused around hydrogen generation rather than a full value chain development. And we're keen to see more projects that have a value chain component in them. In that context, we're willing to work with you and help you develop any of your ideas around new projects in the space of hydrogen, or frankly, for that matter, any other projects you might have that would help drive decarbonization of your industry. And we're always available. Feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can certainly connect you with the right people in the federal system. And perhaps with that, I'll stop and hand it back to our moderator.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate all of the great information. Do you still have time if anyone had questions, or do you have to head off?
I'll stick around for the next 20 minutes or so.
Okay, perfect. Does anyone have any questions for the presentation? Okay, I'm sure some will come in, but yeah, thank you so much again. I appreciate it. And to Dr. David Lazzell, welcome.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen if I might, and thank you, Andrew, for that presentation. Very interesting, and it's great to hear all the stuff that the ISED is doing in this space. So what I'd like to do is to share a short presentation, talk about some of the work that we're doing to hopefully help the carriers and the AMTA member companies to perhaps get some access to some of the funding and some of the initiatives that Andrew Noseworthy just talked about. So this presentation is talked about how AMT member companies can help to revitalize Alberta's economy while addressing climate change. I think that's very clear when you actually look at the transition to net zero, which the Canadian government has committed to, the American government and dozens of other countries around the world have committed to net zero by 2050, by mid-century. When you look at what's needed in this transition, it is a very large portion of what's needed is to replace the energy carriers that we currently use in our energy system today. We know these energy carriers as gasoline, diesel, natural gas, jet fuel. And as you can see in this diagram, a lot of those energy carriers, when they're actually consumed, of course, they produce greenhouse gas emissions, and those emissions are what's causing the problem. They also produce greenhouse gas emissions in extracting the oil and making those energy carriers. And obviously that's a related problem, but together this accounts for more than well over 50% of our emissions in Canada. So if we're going to move to net zero energy emissions, it's about replacing those energy carriers with more electricity, for example, which when it's consumed doesn't provide any emissions. And Andrew Noseworthy just talked about sort of the movement to light and medium duty transportation. Of course, there's opportunities for electricity and space heating, etc. But there's the part that I'd like to talk about is the possibility of using hydrogen as an energy carrier. And it is really important in areas such as heavy duty transport and space heating in cold climates and some industry sectors like steelmaking, etc. Now, it's pretty clear that if we're going to have hydrogen that plays a role as a energy carrier, we're going to need a new value chain and new energy systems to support that. And we've talked about it in heavy duty long distance transport, all of the kind of vehicles shown here, space and water heating, possibly in power generation, especially for long-term storage and sort of peak power and industrial demand areas. But it's important here to note that the only sector of these four where it is possible to deliver zero emission hydrogen at a price that is similar to or less than the incumbent fuel price, whether that's diesel fuel or jet fuel, it is in this area of heavy duty transport. We pay a lot more as Canadians for transportation fuels than we pay for heating fuels or for industrial feedstocks or for fuels supporting power generation. However, even with this, even though the economics looks promising, it can only be achieved at large scales. And that's a lot of what we have been focusing on within the Transition Accelerator and working closely with the AMTA over the last 2 to 3 years. And the focus in this area is really on Class 8 vehicles. And these are the large, as you well know, the Class 8 vehicles are 15 tons and greater vehicles. The medium duty trucks are, Class 3 to Class 7. And the reason that it's the focus here is that the Class 8 vehicles, now these are data just from the province of Alberta, but Class 8 vehicles account for only about 12% of all truck vehicle sales, medium and heavy duty truck sales in the province. But they tend to stay around on the roads longer than some of the other medium duty vehicles. So we actually look at the percentage they account for of the actual registered trucks on the road. It's about 20%. Perhaps even more important than that is the fact that these vehicles, the heavy duty vehicles, drive more each year. And so the vehicle kilometers traveled, or VKT per year, is actually 44%, or only 12% of the vehicle sales, but they're 44% of the kilometers traveled, of all vehicle kilometers traveled by medium and heavy duty vehicles. And these vehicles, of course, carrying heavy loads, they have poor fuel efficiency, and so they account for 54% of the fuel use. And that's where the greenhouse gas emissions come from. The greenhouse gas emissions come out the tailpipe of these vehicles with the combustion of course, the diesel fuel. And it's worth noting that they carry about 81% of the ton kilometers per year, so of the freight moved. And so these vehicles, in this sector, electrification of battery electric vehicles is typically not going to work. They travel too long distances, they're used too many hours a day, and they're moving around in such a way that we need chemical-based fuels, not plug-in recharging, which can work for some of these sectors if in some of these vehicles, because they have enough time, they can be recharged at night. And so we're looking, the net zero solution really here is very clearly coming to point to hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. And as Amanda had talked about, is also hydrogen diesel dual fuel vehicles. That may not be the final solution, but we see them as incredibly important as a stepping stone to get us to a low carbon hydrogen economy. So in order to do this, we need to transform our existing energy system into a new kind of energy system. And if you look at a new kind of energy system that involves a much larger system with whole new demand sectors in that system. Our existing hydrogen energy system is actually very much concentrated in Alberta. In fact, of all of the hydrogen produced today in Canada, about 2/3 of it is actually produced in Alberta. And it's produced from natural gas. It's got what is often called gray hydrogen production. It produces a lot of greenhouse gases, but it produces hydrogen that's used as an industrial feedstock. It's used to make fertilizer nitrogen, or ammonia as you might know it, companies like Nutrien. It's used to upgrade oil from bitumen to synthetic crude oil, and it's used to convert crude oils into gasoline and diesel, jet fuel, etc. And it's used to actually make other chemicals and materials. Now, what we need to do in this is we need to transform that system so that we're not actually producing the CO2, that the hydrogen that is produced is captured and stored. So this is CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We can still produce the industrial feedstocks, and we can start to make fertilizers or oil products with lower emissions. It's also possible to make hydrogen through renewables or nuclear energy through electrolysis of water. So one of the key parts of this new value chain is to actually produce the hydrogen with little or no greenhouse gas emissions. You know, that's often referred to by color, blue hydrogen or green hydrogen. They have similar carbon intensities when you look at the whole system. The second part of this is a need to transport and deliver the hydrogen to distributed sites of demand. It can be transported for export. There's a lot of interest in moving hydrogen from Western Canada to other nations. A lot of international demand that's stimulating a lot of investment and interest. There's a possibility to use it for heat and power, and a possibility for heavy-duty vehicles and to users and provide those vehicles. Another third area, a third sector in this value chain is the equipment manufacturers, the original equipment manufacturers, whether they're making hydrogen fuel cell electric, heavy duty trucks or buses, etc., or whether they're making hydrogen diesel dual fuel vehicles, essentially a diesel vehicle where you've put hydrogen injection in hydrogen on board the vehicle and reduce the demand for diesel because you're using hydrogen as a second fuel source. And of course, in furnaces, it could be water heaters or turbines for power generation. However, what's really important in this whole value chain is the one highlighted in red here, that the buyers and users of the fuel and the vehicle infrastructure, that's basically the group that is represented by the Alberta Motor Transport Association in this sector here. And these are, we see these as the key stakeholders. When you think about it, in this new value chain, they will eventually pay for the entire value chain. They're going to buy the vehicles, they're going to buy the fuel, pay for all of the upstream processing and everything else. So we are talking now about creating a new value chain, a new value chain where this is the sector that is going to end up paying for the whole value chain. They need to be totally engaged, and they're interested just from the beginning as we create this new value chain. Unlike other sectors in the value chain, there are thousands to millions, actually, of decision makers in these sectors here. Whereas there are relatively few companies that are making and transporting hydrogen, and even fewer companies that are actually, be in the business of making these vehicles. And so we would argue, and what's very important, and the reason for talking to this group today, is that public and private investments must really engage and fully focus on the needs of this sector, on the needs of your needs, as you are going to be the key driver of this energy system transformation. This project, this whole hydrogen economy, is going to start in Alberta because Alberta as I mentioned before, is already making 2/3 of Canadian production of hydrogen, and it has already all of the infrastructure in place near Edmonton for hydrogen pipelines, CO2 pipelines to hold the carbon. And indeed, as Andrew Noseworthy talked about, there are many, and been in the last 6 months, many announcements of major production initiatives for making hydrogen without carbon emissions, converting it into ammonia, exporting it, using it as a fuel, using et cetera. We want to help the carrier sector and the energy users have a major seat at this table in helping to design and roll out the transformation of this sector over the next 8 to 10 years and beyond. So to achieve 30% of Class 8 market share in Alberta, we've been doing a lot of analysis of what's possible and how fast one could grow this within the Edmonton area and across Alberta. And the target that we've been setting for is 100% of market share by 2040 to meet the new federal government regulations that they've just announced last week. And we're targeting for about 30% of market share for new Class 8 vehicles by 2030. This would require a very rapid movement. We are now, of course, just ending 2021. By 2023, we're hoping to see 28 vehicles and 2 fueling stations in operation. By 2024, jumping to 61 vehicles and 3 fueling stations, 131 and 6, and then rising rapidly to close to 4,000 vehicles of new vehicles coming on and 80 fueling stations in present overall. So what we are approaching you today about in partnership with the AMTA is to looking for carriers who would like to be early adopters, to like to lead this transition and co-develop a future that really works for the sector. The Transition Accelerator has also been working with government departments and industry partners to identify policies and programs and initiatives that will minimize the risk and the costs to the carriers, to help to pay for the differential vehicle costs of these hydrogen vehicles, to potentially provide sort of a leasing models that Amanda talked about, to provide guarantees in the hydrogen availability and the cost of what that hydrogen is going to cost to the user, and to ensure the availability of maintenance and training for these vehicles, and also create a branding opportunity that will help in competitiveness of your companies in a marketplace that is increasingly looking for low carbon alternatives. I'd like to end by asking you to contact us if you have an interest in learning more or signing on. And maybe just as I end my comments, I'd ask Mark Lee Wilson, my colleague from the Transition Accelerator, to make any comments that he might have, just add any statement he might have on this matter. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David. Really quick, just 2 things I wanted to point out is that, David mentioned there's thousands or millions of decision makers in the transportation sector. And Andrew Noseworthy mentioned that the government has a preference for large projects. So this is the reason why we're taking this hub approach, where we're trying to bring collectively groups of industry stakeholders together. So really what we're looking for is senior level leadership in the transportation sector, C-suites and presidents, to meet with other senior leaders across the whole value chain. So again, these are C-suites and presidents, but from the fuel providers that you probably already know and use. So we're arranging this consortium, I guess, or meetings to discuss co-creating a future that is prosperous within this new net zero energy system, and to ensure continued safe, reliable operation of our national supply chain, quite frankly. So we'll be reaching out to carriers that we think are well positioned to participate, but we're also very open to hearing from those early adopters who want to make a difference. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was super informative. Oh, sorry, go Andy. I see you popped up.
No, I just wanted to, now might be a chance for any questions, Josh, that have popped in, and really encourage everybody to participate in this conversation. This is super key, the information that Amanda ADM Noseworthy and Dr. Lazzell brought to our organization today. And it's really critical that we, as an industry, lead the change and really that path forward. Because if we don't take the lead now, that path is going to be created for us. And I think that's critically important for us as an industry, that we really take this home and push it forward. Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I was going to ask if you could share your guys' contact details that you mentioned just when we send the CRA notes out, if that's possible, Andy.
I've also made the deck available, and the deck I had could be shared with everybody on the call. So I've sent it to Robert District.
We'll make everything available in the minutes, all of the decks and everything like that. Do we have any questions that came in, Rob?
Yeah, so we had a couple come in from Redu. Who is ensuring EPA and greenhouse gas emission compliance for dual fuel engines was one. So if either of you can speak to that, that'd be great.
We're certainly in very active conversations with the ministries of Ministry of Transportation, provincially and federally, and with the companies that are involved in the hydrogen diesel dual fuel. It has been approved in BC and is being used on the hydrogen dual fuel technologies being used in British Columbia now, and we are in discussion to try to not only get approvals, of course, which but also to help to get some support for larger scale deployment of these vehicles, and I think that's going to be critical to make to reduce some of the risk to the carriers. But I think it's a great question. I'm not sure that because this is fairly new technology, it's it hasn't gone through all of the regulatory processes.
Okay, excellent. And the second question was, in Europe, H2 as a fuel is still more expensive than diesel, which also costs a lot more than in North America. H2 projects costs in Europe are also partially offset by removal of the road access tax. Can you share some of the ROI details based on Alberta costs?
What we know is certainly the plan to put hydrogen into engines, and all the discussions we have is that it would not be, this portion would not be exposed to fuel charges for road taxes, and at least in the early stages until until probably well into 2030. In terms of overall costs, the cost in Alberta for hydrogen are about half or 1/3 of the cost to make hydrogen in Europe, and in fact the wholesale cost of hydrogen for blue hydrogen in the Edmonton region is approximately half the wholesale cost of diesel fuel. Now it costs more to deliver it to a fueling station and to deploy it, but that cost differential comes down as you get to scale. And what we are looking for is hydrogen fueling stations that that are in the 2 to 4 or 5 tons of hydrogen per day, which means we need hundreds of vehicles using individual fueling stations, or in the 50 to 100 or 200 vehicles or more using a fueling station every day, and we need vehicles that have a large fuel demand. And so this can most easily be achieved with Class 8 vehicles, as we've shown, and with municipal bus fleets. And so that's the target market we're working on. And what we are trying to do is to use the Edmonton region initially, and then expand it along to corridors to Calgary and other populated regions, to create low-cost hydrogen corridors, which will not only actually stimulate the more use of more hydrogen, but actually start to attract companies around the world who will see Alberta as the place for low-cost hydrogen production and a place to try to rapidly deploy new technologies that use zero-emission fuels. So I think that we're a much better position than Europe from our geological sequestration capabilities, the cost of natural gas, but I guess right now this is mostly paperwork and models with some field trials. that are just going on now, working with AMTA and ASTEC project, etc. What we have to do is demonstrate that this can be achieved in the real world with industry partners that are members of AMTA and other industry partners along that whole value chain.
Well, it's like any other technology. When you introduce it, you don't have the infrastructure necessarily to support it. That comes along as the demand increase. It's like 4K TV. It's like cell phones. It will come with time. From Jarvis, has PACCAR or any other major OEM showed any interest in hydrogen?
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Has PACCAR is an engine developer, or
Yes,
or
PACCAR.
other major OEMs showed any interest? So CAT,
Yes.
Cummins, Detroit.
Cummins, we have at the University of Alberta has a partnership with Cummins, and Cummins actually has not only provided a free engine, and they've provided all their software for the engine control module, their engine control computer, and the University, Bob Koch at the University of Alberta is working with us and with the in part with the AMTA to basically modify the ECU of the diesel engine so it injects hydrogen. And those trials are going on right now. We hope within 18 months they'll be ready to actually put into a real vehicle. And so there's a lot of interest in that. We've also had some discussion with PACCAR and some discussion with sort of other companies like Caterpillar tractors and some large off-road vehicles about hydrogen diesel dual fuel in those vehicles. And there certainly is interest. The big issue that those companies are wanting is they say, well, where do you get the hydrogen from? So what we're trying to do is to create, and the work that Mark's been doing within the Transition Accelerator is to try to put together a coalition of the willing along value chains, along corridors where we can get demand for hydrogen up with enough of the carriers in being involved, with some bus fleets from some of the municipalities in the region, but also municipal buildings that we could convert to hydrogen and then justify perhaps hydrogen pipelines that would really get the economics to a point where we can start to really get the interest of the OEMs, because we've actually have cost-effective hydrogen available, that's readily available, and indeed incentive mechanisms are in place to get to scale. So I think it's a great question.
Excellent. So from Ron, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
So I just wanted to flag also that Cummins purchased a fuel cell manufacturing company, and they're definitely interested in hydrogen powertrains.
And Toyota has been a big proponent of hydrogen fuel cells as well. And when you got the world's largest car manufacturer, second depending on the day, that certainly doesn't hurt, right?
Yep.
So from Ron, can we not piggyback our research and development on this off the European example rather than inventing a new wheel? This would make the transition easier and more global, would it not?
I think that's a great idea. We've been very much having regular discussions with both Europe and with the UK, which are also moving fast in the hydrogen into heavy transport sector. One of the projects we are working with IAV, it's an automotive engineering company in Germany, and have got them involved in a project in Edmonton. And we're hoping to scale that up for it's a hydrogen diesel dual fuel project for heavy haulers. So I think that certainly we're trying to piggyback on whatever is developed there, but at the same time, I think there's an interest in Europe actually trying to. They have a hard time getting to the scale needed because their hydrogen's quite a lot more expensive. There's a question here as well I see about Hyundai. At this point, we haven't yet been able to convince Hyundai to bring their trucks here and to get them, allow them to be driven on Canadian roads and in North America. We have started those conversations. We are hoping the work that Amanda's doing in setting up the Hydrogen Roadshow will really, especially if we can get the infrastructure and all of the funding support behind the AMTA Roadshow project, we hope to be able to create a real attraction to not only bring Hyundai here with their hydrogen trucks, but maybe Toyota and I would really like to see perhaps a manufacturer of a Canadian hydrogen truck start to come forward. And there's certainly been some discussions about that as well, and to get them to maybe start setting up manufacturing in Canada to serve a Canadian market, which I think can move faster than markets in perhaps other countries.
And I'd posted in the chat, if anybody else has access, there's a YouTube video from Harry's Garage where they go look at JCB, which is a British equipment manufacturer. They make everything from small skid steers to tractors to larger excavators, and they're betting on both. They're doing battery for some stuff, which the stuff that they only need 3-4 hours a day, and then as you said earlier, you need the equipment to be able to run 12 hours a day, 11 hours a day, or in 11 hours a shift kind of thing. Yeah. And they're leaning towards hydrogen on that. So it's about a half-hour video if you really want to see a manufacturer's perspective on what they're betting on the future is going to look like, then it's not a bad little video there at all. So do we have any more questions for our hydrogen experts?
Hey, I would just throw up, thanks for the presentations, everybody. Definitely from a Canadian perspective and Alberta perspective, a lot of the trucks that are out there today aren't meeting the weight requirements we need here. So a lot of the work that we're doing, we're not reinventing the wheel, but we need to accommodate what our industry requires here in Alberta, which are longer distances, heavier weights, and our environment. When we look at some of the roads that we have to drive on and where we have to go, they're key components. Further to that, when we look at really the change in why, the dual fuel to full electrification and the value to that, I think it's something that really needs to be emphasized, that when you go from 20,000 parts in a truck to 2,000, not changing oil, not doing all this stuff, you will see from different OEMs, new OEMs emerging, as well as current OEMs adapting to that technology, because it's going to really change ownership. All the threats that we've had in a vehicle of overheating, running out of oil, freezing, all of those things now get moved to the side. So it offers that opportunity to say, hey, we can look at the vehicle in a different way, even ownership in a different way. So there's a lot for this to be figured out. It's not nailed down yet, but I think from the group on here, I don't think it's any secret that we've seen a lot of snake oil salesmen in our industry. Having an opportunity like this that we can prove where we're going to see benefit, and as an industry want to move towards it, I think this is the great way to do it. And right now, further to Rob's comment, when we look, there is not going to be one or the other on electrification or electrification by hydrogen. When it is by usage, if you have a bus that sits all night, you can charge it at night. If you have a cement truck that works during the day, it charges at night. However, when you're sitting in the middle of a highway in Beaver Lodge and you need to refuel to keep your driver going, you don't want to sit and refuel. That's where hydrogen comes into play to keep you going, to be able to do that. So that's all what we're looking at here, to try and move forward with technology to benefit the transportation industry, where typically we see investment sometimes doesn't have return. When you make that move to electrification, that return is there, and that's where we're looking for help and ideas, and what industry would want to see from this, to be able to go back and see people like Andre and say, this is what we need to make this to go forward, and how we can drive the value chain and create the economy and the benefit for the transportation industry.
Well said, Chris. Okay, so Josh, do you want to close out the questions on the hydrogen and then either move into the BC floods update or give everybody a 10-minute bio break?
Yeah, I think you did cover all of the current questions. So if there's no more, if we're good to take a 10-minute break, we should still be fine for time, as long as we're mindful. So were there any other questions that we wanted to bring up? All right. Yeah, that was awesome and really informative. So thank you very much just for joining. Yeah, today this was really good. So Andy, did you want to say any words before we take a 10-minute break?
Just wanted to thank everybody again. Fantastic presentations, Dr. Lazzell. ADM Noseworthy and Amanda. Great to have you here. We're looking forward to hearing from you. And this is part of the benefit that we're trying to bring to membership is this new technology and driving the infrastructure and the technology towards what our needs are in industry. So thanks, Josh. Great presentations. I think this is a huge opportunity for the industry to look at alternative fuels. We're all going to be there here very soon. So I think it's really super important that we as an industry, like I said, really lead this path forward. So anyways, without further ado, Josh.
Perfect. Yeah, we have Jason Norden. He's going to speak on the CBP, the Cbsa, and in-transit overview. Welcome.
Yes, thanks, Josh. All right, so I'm going to share my presentation here. Okay, so presentations on CBP and Cbsa guidance to alleviate supply chain disruptions in British Columbia, and CBP as U.S. Customs and Cbsa as Canadian Customs. And this was basically all presented in collaboration with a joint call that occurred on November 19th with U.S. Customs, Canadian Customs, anyone in the trade community that wanted to attend. And this is the information that they put out in regards to this. So due to extreme weather conditions in British Columbia, Canada, that have caused flooding, landslides, road closures, and other supply chain disruptions, Canadian domestic truck carriers may need to transit through the U.S. to reach other destinations in Canada. Any Canadian carriers that currently operate between the U.S. and Canada, as well as domestically in Canada, are encouraged to follow the standard procedures for transit, including the advanced filing of an electronic truck manifest and utilization of an in-bond or in-transit transaction. This will facilitate crossing and decrease delays at the border that will be caused by these temporary measures. So again, electronic transmission, any Canadian carriers that currently operate between the US and Canada are expected to do as they typically would, follow the standard procedures for transit, including the advanced filing of an ACE manifest and an electronic in-bond or CF 7512. Customs has stressed that if carriers have the ability to file electronically, they should continue to do so as they normally would. So what is the U.S. bonded carrier? So one of the misconceptions right away, being bonded in Canada is considerably different than being a U.S. bonded carrier. To become a U.S. bonded carrier, you have to obtain an international carrier bond through an approved bond surety. Customs brokers can also assist with this, as we work with bond sureties regularly. The process to become a bonded carrier often can take between 8 to 12 weeks, as the applications are reviewed and approved both by U.S. Customs and the bond surety. And once you're approved as a bonded carrier, carriers and/or their brokers can file their in-bonds electronically from one U.S. port of entry to another U.S. port. So again, just the difference on bonded, non-bonded. Bonded carriers have the ability to file electronically, and with that ability, they are expected to continue to file as they normally would. Non-bonded carriers cannot file electronically, but with that in mind, due to these disruptions in BC, U.S. Customs is waiving the bond requirements temporarily, but they are again allowing this only at certain ports of entry, and they've provided strict instructions that must be followed. So here are the following instructions that apply to truck carriers that do not have electronic manifesting capabilities or ability to file as a U.S. bonded carrier. So bond requirements for carriers within the containment area shown below will be waived for non-traditional small-time trucking companies. That wording there is specifically from the message from U.S. Customs. Small-time trucking companies, I don't even know why they mentioned it, because they basically just said it's basically anyone who is not a U.S. bonded carrier that needs to transit through the U.S. To get back to Canada. So U.S. Customs officers will input the manifest information in ACE manually based on the submission of documents provided. Documents will be covered on a further slide. And currently, again, the area of operations that are allowing these special concessions are limited to these ports: Emerson, Manitoba, which on the U.S. side is Pembina, North Dakota, North Portal, Saskatchewan, which is Portal, North Dakota, Coots, Alberta, which is Sweetgrass, Montana, Kingsgate, BC, other side, Eastport, Idaho, and Osios, BC, which is Oroville, Washington, and Abbotsford, Huntington, BC, which is Sumas, Washington, and Pack Highway, which is Blaine, Washington. And I've highlighted the Abbotsford, Huntington, BC, Sumas port of entry, as this one was just added recently, just on December 9th. They added that to the list. So additional entry filing requirements. So user fee requirements will still need to be adhered to, and fees will be collected. CBP advised this typically between $5.95 or $13.65 US dollars per crossing. This, of course, varies based on if there are other partner government agencies involved. Partner government agencies in the US, there is over 47 of them, and those would be, for example, FDA, USDA, DOT, which is now called NHTSA, the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration. More info on user fees can be found here, and there's a hyperlink that you can click on from the presentation. But again, these slides will be available after this webinar. For in-transit delays, such as breakdown during transit, the carrier shall contact the nearest CBP port of entry, and that would be the reason why I put phone numbers for contact information at all those ports of entry on my previous slide. The expected duration of the following workaround measures will be for the duration of the infrastructure delays, or up to 30 days, and reevaluated once commercial traffic can normalize or operationally resume. So container security verification. All equipment, trailers, and containers moving under these procedures must be sealed at or before arrival to the U.S. border. The seal should be clearly identified to U.S. Customs and Canadian Customs for verification and inspection as necessary. Carriers will not unload or load any additional cargo or break the seal on these containers or trailers while in the U.S. Upon arrival to the U.S. border, identification of any documents, including bills of lading, packing lists, invoices, foreign government certificates, as well as trailer license number, will be provided to the CBP officer and/or ag specialist. Upon re-entering Canada, carriers transiting under these procedures will present themselves to Canadian Customs for verification of these seals and collection of seal numbers, and provide supporting documentation used for entry into the U.S., as well as driver identification. And covering the documentation, U.S. Customs has advised they will exercise maximum flexibility regarding these domestic freight shipments. It is recommended that carriers have normal clearance documents readily available, such as bills of lading, invoices, etc., to facilitate clearance. And just as far as travel documents, Customs covered in that call, the WHTSI, which is the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative, documents that are approved for land travel, passport card, trusted traveler documents such as a Nexus, Century, or Fast card, an enhanced driver's license, or a Form I-872 American Indian card or enhanced tribal card. So these are required for all drivers and passengers or co-drivers. Drivers and occupants must be in possession of these documents, including Form I-194 waivers of inadmissibility when applying for admission. And anyone wondering what that is for drivers and vehicle occupants who have a criminal history and do not have an approved, it'd be for drivers and occupants who have a criminal history but have been approved, have to have that I-194 waiver of inadmissibility to transit through the U.S. Prohibited items. So Customs said items that are currently legal in Canada but not legal in the U.S. will not be authorized for movement under these procedures. Didn't cover any of those in particular. Can imagine that marijuana would probably be one of the ones on the top of that list. Or restricted items such as medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, agriculture, commodities, and live animals may require further review by CBP personnel at the port of entry. This can include additional documentation mandated by the appropriate agencies such as Department of Agriculture or Food and Drug Administration. FDA prior notice. I know on the call, one of the main questions was, with these in-transit moves, were they still going to require FDA prior notice for goods that required FDA prior notice, which is, of course, food products mainly, also drug products. And FDA said they will assist using enforcement discretion when there is no prior notice for articles of food carried by Canadian domestic truck carriers transiting through the U.S. To reach destinations in Canada as a result of these supply chain disruptions. And CFIA, which is the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, they advise that carriers must follow the departmental Canadian Customs guidelines outlined in Memorandum D342, which is just the current highway pre-arrival and reporting requirements, or the emergency protocol described on the previous slides for food. CFIA does not require certification documentation for the movement of food, including meat, eggs, and raw milk. And these goods do not have to be declared to CFIA's National Import Service Center, but it must meet all conditions in the Safe Food for Canadian regulations as if it was being moved between provinces. And livestock movements. So companies must contact the Canadian Food Inspection Agency before organizing any livestock shipment transiting through the U.S. So an animal welfare agreement between the USDA and CFIA will allow for the emergency transit of live animals through the U.S., and that was signed on November 18th, 2021. This allows for the emergency movement of animals outside the flooded areas through the U.S. in case it becomes necessary to evacuate and that all other Canadian roads are blocked or impaired, and for the travel of live animals from Alberta to slaughterhouses in British Columbia due to lack of capacity to slaughter those animals elsewhere. These animals must be inspected before loading and must be transported with an endorsed CFIA emergency transit health certificate with seal numbers recorded on that certificate. No USDA import transit is required for those parts. So covering the COVID-19 health measures, no change to existing guidance and communication regarding pandemic-related matters. Commercial drivers, as employed in the trade and transportation sector, are considered essential under the existing provisions for truckers. Pre-arrival testing, quarantine requirements, post-arrival testing are not required for persons in this trade or transportation sector, including truck drivers, crew members of any aircraft, shipping vessels or trains, or those who enter Canada for the purpose of performing their duties as a member of that sector. Again, temporary measures, these are subject to change and may be updated by U.S. Customs and Canadian Customs as the situation evolves, and they will do their best to communicate further guidance and provide updates as they become available. So for more information on U.S. Customs and Border Protection's electronic manifesting of inbounds, the links there available again on the slides that we shared after the presentation. Also more information on Cbsa's in-transit movement and the memorandum previously mentioned D342. And last link there is actually the CSMS message, and that's just U.S. Customs messaging system that basically just covers all the information in this presentation. That would be the original one, which I mentioned was updated again on December 9th. The only change to that original message was just adding that port of entry, Huntington, BC, and Sumas, Washington. Lastly, questions, just my company, Coal International USA, can be a valuable resource for any of your companies. We file thousands of inbound transactions for bonded carriers each year. My information is available there as well as my email, and below just a picture of all the Coal International locations.
All right, Jason, do you have any problems with me sharing out the PDF version of this PowerPoint to interested members?
Nope, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, so if anybody wants a copy of this, Andre, for example, I can email you a copy of this presentation.
Sorry, Andy, I saw you up, so I wasn't sure if you were just going to take the reins. But yeah, Jason, thank you very much. It's a challenge right now, as we all know, just trying to navigate through, shut down highways and destroyed highways and making sure we're still in compliance. So I appreciate all the information. Were there any questions for Jason specifically that someone wanted to ask right now? We do see a couple of people, Rob, that want the presentation.
I think what we can do is probably send the all of these presentations out in the, see if we can package them up for everybody on a series of links that'll go in the minutes there, Josh. I thought probably be really easy.
Perfect. Yeah, it sounds really good. All right. Well, yeah, thanks again, Jason. Appreciate everything that you and your team are doing to help make this a little easier for carriers. It's great. All right, Andy, on to you with the FMCSA exemption overview.
Hey, thanks everyone. Today I'm going to go over the Canadian as well as FMCSA exemptions for using BC routes. And if you're a Canadian carrier, if you intend on traveling using the Transport Canada Federal Hours of Service exemption, which is first up that we want to talk about. So because of the BC floods, just like what Jason mentioned, we have a whole bunch of road closures. Transport Canada has issued a federal exemption for hours of service. So when they issued this exemption, literally sections 12 through 29 of the Commercial Vehicle Hours of Service Regulation, federal regulations are being exempted, everything from your on-duty times down to cycle driving. The key thing here, though, that we really need to emphasize is who really meets this requirement. And this is critical for Canadian carriers to understand. I'm going to keep my presentations very short because not a lot of carriers are going to meet this, but for the purposes of this exemption, it is to support the efforts by extra-provincial truck undertakings and their drivers to transport essential supplies and equipment in direct assistance to the emergency relief efforts in responding to flooding in British Columbia. So what does that mean? That means that you have to be transporting a bulldozer or something to move landslides or deal with the construction of the highways, again, perhaps a special bridge girder, something like that that's directly fixing the flood or taking supplies to that flooded area. For example, I know some of our carriers are transporting fuels to the lower mainland. So if you're transporting supplies to that area that can't get fuel, that's a great example of when you would be allowed to use this federal exemption, which literally exempts you from everything. And all you need to do is keep a copy of your true and accurate logbook and then identify the fact that you're using that. So chatting with Alberta Transportation, what they require for this exemption is that you simply email them notification of your company, your drivers, and the equipment that is going to be using this exemption. And obviously what they're going to do is down the road, if there's any reason to, or warrant to do so, then they'll have a, go back and have a look at the to ensure that the permit was used properly and stuff like that. So you have to notify Alberta Transportation if you intend on using that. Again, that Transport Canada permit is very gracious. It literally exempts you from pretty much all of the Canadian hours of service requirements. But it's super important that you ensure that you're going to be included. I'll include this hyperlink in the minutes so that you've got a copy of this. I know that we sent this out on e-news already, but we'll do it again. Are there any questions about the Transport Canada exemption? If not, I'm going to move directly into the US FMCSA exemption. It's pretty much the same as Canada here. Okay, I don't have any questions, so I'm going to move on to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So we had some great conversations with Bruce Holmes. Bruce is typically at our meetings here. He's a great resource. Bruce is a super knowledgeable fellow, and he was able to take the time to work with me on this to help myself and Dave understand this a little bit better. And then we sat through the BCTA, which all of you were invited into too, presentation. So this is really just a recap. So the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, for the first time ever, is allowing carriers to go through the US and essentially exempting them from 390 through 399 of 49 CFR. So if, again, the FMCSA has issued a regional declaration to facilitate the movement of goods through the United States to bypass road closures and areas in Canada cut off by flooding or landslides. So essentially what that is all of the requirements for the US, including some of the drug and alcohol. Now there's some stipulations. Besides this regional emergency declaration, what I did learn is there's also this notice of enforcement discretion. And this is a second document that all carriers have to pay super close importance to, because this really stipulates in point 3 who can use this FMCSA exemption. And this is why we're not going to get too held up on it, because only applies to Canadian motor carriers and drivers providing direct assistance to the flooding and landslides emergency in British Columbia, Canada, who are providing emergency services or transportation of essential goods, supplies, and equipment. Exactly the same as Canada, unless you are delivering a bridge girder, you are delivering a bulldozer, food, fuel to a flooded area, a road that has been washed out. You do not qualify for this FMCSA exemption. If you are, you're able to go through. So here's some examples that the BCTA gave in their presentation. Yes, you could use this example if you're transporting construction equipment to and from road repair sites. Yes, if you're transporting food and medical supplies to distribution centers in a region that is experiencing shortages, so emergency restocking, and then transporting beer from one point of Canada to another point of Canada via US roadways, no. Although some of us may think that's an emergency, you can't use it. So make sure that we pay attention. You know, the other point that's really key too is backhauls. You cannot do any backhauls using either the Canadian Transport Canada exemption or this FMCSA. So if you were to drop some equipment off that falls under the FMCSA or Transport Canada exemption, you cannot just transport any product back under the exemption as well too. You must follow all of the rules. Essentially, this US exemption is historical. It has eliminated the need for a US DOT number, driver qualifications, some of the traffic requirements, yearly inspections. But what's key here is if you feel that you're qualified to use this, there's a bunch of restrictions and conditions that doesn't relieve you of everything. So this is only for carriers providing relief as described. 1 through 3 drivers, class 1 through 3 drivers, you must have a national safety code number. You must not be unsatisfactory or conditional. You must follow all the rules such as speeding. You can't be texting and all those good things. I'll send this presentation out, the link to it, so please reference it. You must follow all of the Canadian driver's license requirements, hazmat requirements in Canada, as well as a US weight restrictions. If you're placed out of service for any reason at all, you can't use this restriction. And when your direct assistant ends, the same as Canada, you don't get this anymore, and you must take a 10-hour break and or a combination of breaks up to 14 hours. You've also got to keep this emergency declaration in your vehicle. And frankly, this declaration ends December 23rd. So I don't know if anyone has been using this. Are there any questions on this before we talk about some of the other things that you might need to go into the US? Any questions on the 2 exemptions, Canada or the US? Okay. Essentially, if you've got a drivers already operating in the US, you can bring more drivers on, but they are going to need passports. You're going to need prorate NIFTA for those vehicles, remember. So you've got to ensure that all of the new vehicles and drivers are meeting the requirements in the US. If you have an existing FMCSA number, or sorry, if you're using the FMCSA exemption, pardon me, wrong slide, you've got additional requirements. You have to have a passport, prorate IFTA apply to you, as well as US insurance coverages. My apologies for that, getting ahead of myself. As well as you must ensure that you meet the US and Canada vaccine requirement, which Chris is going to talk about right away. Existing and US carriers going down to the US, you know, if you're going to expand your operations, that's just what I talked about. Make sure that you follow all of the required US rules. And then really what I think is key here is this isn't going away. I think the message is to Canadian carriers, for you all to consider, is if you think that we are going to be moving into an extended period of time. If you think you need to use a US route, it would be very wise probably to look at the requirements of becoming a US carrier and start that process sooner than later. The process does take some time. The US DOT number is about 10 minutes. What takes some time is your operating authority in the US, your MCC number. So as well as getting people into the random tested drug and alcohol program is fairly quick and things like that. So I've listed these things out. Really, those are the two big exemptions. You've got an Fmcsa exemption to go through the US if you qualify, or you've got a Transport Canada exemption for hours of service if you're going through Canada, but do you qualify to use it? Are there any questions on the two parts that I went over when it comes to the BC flood relief in Canada and the US when it comes to the regulatory issues? Okay, Mr. Chair, I will turn it over to you to continue with the agenda.
All right, thanks, Andy. And actually, I'm going to pass it right back to you for the Level 8 Partial Inspection Credit Subcommittee update.
So we've got a Level 8 Subcommittee update meeting this Friday. I'm going to keep this to about 1 minute. Basically, what we're doing is we're looking at, is there some way of getting partway there to the CVSA definition of a Level 8 inspection? And is there some way we could work with Alberta Transportation and Justice in developing some partial credits for carriers using that technology that Dan was so kind to talk to us about? So this is really, really an important piece for the association and really critical for carriers too. So just a quick little update. What's super key is important, and what's really, really exciting is the course that's coming up, Mr. Chair, and I'll let you introduce Carrie.
Absolutely, thanks, Andy. And over to you, Carrie, for the CVSA Roadside Inspection Training course.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me here. I don't know, Andy, we never really spoke, so I didn't know if you wanted me to present the slide deck that I had last week or just talk about the course.
That's up to you, whatever you've got available. I know you're in board meetings right now, Carrie.
Yeah.
You hopped out of meetings.
Excuse any background noises because I'm in a hotel and there's people walking around. But so I just wanted to talk to the group briefly about the Level 1 inspection course that's coming up in Alberta at AMTA in their facility just outside of Calgary. So the driver requirements course is, let me actually just, if I can, I'll just share my screen. Let me see here. Can you see my presentation there?
Looks good so far.
Okay. So it's easier for me to just talk about it and then you can look at it on the screen. So the course is basically, I used to work in Ontario, Canada for 30 years, and now I work with CBSA. But while I was in Ontario, I chaired the vehicle committee with CBSA for over 10 years. And quite often we would have conversation in the committee with the industry folks specifically. They always wanted to attend the same Level 1 inspection course that the inspectors go through to better understand the regulations, to better understand what's required of them, what their drivers are going to go through at roadside, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not possible for the industry to go to the same courses as the inspectors do. But when I started at CBSA, more than half of our membership, probably now about 65% of our membership, is in fact industry folk. And so when I started at CBSA 5 years ago, I went to the board and asked if I could develop this industry course specific to folks like yourselves to better understand the regulatory requirements and to understand what inspectors are taught for two reasons. One, to know what inspectors are supposed to be doing, and if in fact they're not, then you can follow up with the agency to determine why things were done differently than how they were trained. So the course is a 2-week course. However, for the purposes of the industry, I split it into two completely separate weeks for two reasons. One, I understand from an industry point of view that it's difficult for any industry person to take 2 weeks from their operations to attend a course. But more importantly, most industries, they will have people that work in the back office that are more interested in driver qualifications, the electronic logging device rules, federal hours of service, and documenting and keeping annual inspection reports, trip inspection reports, etc. So that's the driver requirements course, and it covers the first 13 steps of a level 1 inspection. And then further to that, from step 14 to 37 of the level 1 is basically from the start of the truck, counterclockwise around the truck, under the truck, and completing the inspection. Generally in a larger, particularly larger trucking companies, that would be more your fleet people, your mechanics, people like that. So it's not always the same person. So that's one of the basic reasons why I split it into two parts. And I never have the courses back to back for that same reason, because in a lot of cases, I do see the same people twice. So Andy approached me a couple of years ago and wanted a Canadian course. So this course I first developed under American rules and have been teaching it now since 2018. Had several classes in the United States, but through COVID, I had the opportunity to sit down and create the Canadian version of this same course. So Andy is the one that approached me and wanted to host the first one. So we're having the first one the second week of January, and both of them are in Rocky View, Alberta. So the Canadian driver requirements course is from January 10th to the 14th, and the vehicle requirements course is from March 14th to the 18th. So to just give you an idea of what's covered, I sort of already mentioned it, but when you finish the driver requirements course, basically if you had an inspector that was certified to just level 3 status, that is that course. But it's also the first 13 steps of the 37-step level 1 inspection course. So that's what we cover in the first week. And it covers things like orientation. And I will tell you that, you know, it's pretty fundamental at the beginning, but what our industry folk wanted with Cbsa, they wanted to know exactly what inspectors go through. So every time I taught the course, and I still do, I send out a survey monkey to the people that were in the course asking, was there information in that course that wasn't necessary? Not enough information? Is there something you want me to pull out of the course to make it shorter? I have yet to hear anybody tell me to take anything out. I have heard people ask me to put more in, but if I put more in, it will definitely be longer than 40 hours of information. So you'll see here in these bullets some of the information, well, pretty much all of the information that's covered in the course. I will tell you the bulk of the time frame is in the hours of service and record of duty status area. Hours of service in Canada is far more complicated than it is in the United States. So it's very time consuming. And when inspectors go through their driver requirements course, it probably takes them 2.5 days to get through that section. Because it's not just going through the regulations, it's putting pen to paper, working through graph grids, coming out and really understanding day rules, north of 60, south of 60, deferrals, all the different things that a lot of drivers stay away from, and a lot of motor carriers stay away from it because they don't understand it well enough to ensure that they're complying. So that's the first part. And then the vehicle requirements course, like I mentioned, is step 14 through 37. And that would be completion of the level 1 inspection. It is from March 14th to the 18th. And it covers, like I said, starting at the front of the tractor, working around counterclockwise, going underneath, and then finishing off the inspection. So it covers all kinds of components like you see here on this slide. It references NSC Standard 11B. So for instance, I know in Alberta, there's a roadside regulation that Alberta inspectors use when they're inspecting trucks. Similarly in Ontario, Manitoba, British Columbia, etc. But all those regulations are based on NSC Standard 11B. So when we teach inspectors out of the gate, because it's a Canadian course and it's a certification course for the country, the regulation or the standard that's referred to is NSC Standard 11B. Then we cover the out of service criteria. We go through inspection procedures, any operational policies that CBSA has that are reflective of Canadian regulation. And by the time we're done, you should have a good idea on how a level 1 is conducted at roadside, how it should be conducted. CBSA's main objective is to make sure if you are inspected in Alberta, you should be being inspected the same way in Michigan. That procedure should be the same. The out of service should be the same. The only thing that varies is the regulations that are used inside of that, inside the confines of that province or state. So I always attempt to, when I have these courses, to have somebody from the state present to ask any state related questions. So I've done the same in Canada. If any of you are familiar with Sergeant Brian Daviduke, he has received authorization to come to these courses. So he will be there. He is from the Alberta Transportation Solicitor General. So he will be there to answer any specific Alberta questions. And my co-instructor for the course is Alf Brown, who used to work in Ontario. He then worked in Alberta, but has since retired. So I just wanted to let everybody know that the course is available. You can go on CBSA's website, or I believe you can go straight to AMTA's website because the registration is being taken care of by AMTA and Andy. And I will leave it at that and ask you if you have any questions for me.
Outstanding. Thank you very much, Carrie. Sorry, Andrew, were you going to say something?
I think a couple questions rolled in there. Just the vehicle registration or registration for the vehicle course will be up in 2022. I don't believe you need Part A to take the vehicle, Carrie. Am I correct?
You do not. I mean, it's advantageous, I won't lie, because in some cases we spend more time understanding the manuals and things in the first part. So I've had that happen in the US where somebody comes to the second one and there's people that are in the second one that were in the first one. So they struggle a little bit on day one because the other people already have been through the regulations in the out of service. So they know how to kind of manhandle it better, but otherwise, no.
Perfect. Outside of that, I don't see any real questions. There's a little bit more information. Remember, we're going to put, Carrie, if you can send me your presentation,
Sure.
and I'll include your slide deck in the minutes as well, too, as well as a link for registration. And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Okay, we'll move on to the WCB update. WCB rate and info update. Leanne and Deborah. Sorry, I didn't see who was on.
Yep, I'm here.
Oh,
Thanks
there.
for having us. All right. Everybody's probably aware you've probably already received your premium rate statements for the year 2022 through your MyWCB portal, but just wanted to give you a little bit of information. So the industry rates are shown as an amount per $100 of assessable earnings. The average rate, premium rate for 2022 will be $1.17 per 100, and the WCB will absorb over $265 million in employer premiums. What that means is Alberta's employers will see the average premium rate increase only 3 cents from $1.14 in 2020 to $1.17, rather than the required rate of $1.42 that would otherwise be required to cover the cost of the claims for 2022. So again, the WCB is using the accident fund to subsidize that rate increase. Just to give you a little bit of information on where the premiums go that you pay to the WCB. So 79% of the premiums that you pay goes to fund the claim costs completely. 15% are for the administrative costs, which includes our wages and the running of the WCB. And 6% goes to fund occupational health and safety, safety associations, and the appeals commission. Some other highlights for the 2022 rates. The maximum assessable earnings is unchanged from 2021, so it'll remain at 98.7. Minimum personal coverage for all those personal coverage holders out there is again unchanged from 2021. It'll remain at 31,300. One thing that is increasing is the no time loss claim threshold. So in the last couple of years, it's been at $1,500 and it's increasing to $1,800 for 2022. The minimum premium is remaining unchanged at $200. So as I mentioned, again, your information should all be in your inbox already. I think most of the employers I've heard from have already received them. So just some information on the levied industries that are part of the AMTA. So the 50714, the general trucking category, the 2022 rate is $4.35 per 100. The 2021 rate was $4.38, so a decrease of 0.68%, so well done. The specialized trucking industry 50701, the 2022 rate went up to $271 from $266 last year, so that's a 1.88% increase. The garbage collection, which is industry code 57901, the 2022 rate is 2.86%, was 282 last year, so that's an increase of $1 or 1.42%. We just thought we'd mention the oil field trucking. It's not an AMTA levied industry, but it's part of the trucking group, so we thought we'd mention it. The 2022 rate is 2.76%. The 2021 industry rate was 270, so this is the biggest increase in the trucking sector at a 2.22% change there. So again, there's more rate setting information available on our website. Just wanted to remind everyone that the Alberta Health and Safety Conference is back. It'll be held in Edmonton this year, May 5th and 6th at NAIT's Productivity and Innovation Center in Edmonton. And the other thing I just wanted to remind everyone about is our job seeker profile that we are highlighting in the AMTA newsletters. So last one we updated, I believe, was from middle of November. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the gentleman that we are featuring there. His name is Miles. He's an easygoing individual with a very friendly demeanor and positive attitude. He brings an extensive experience in the transportation or trucking industry and a willingness to venture outside his comfort zone. He is scheduled to begin levels 1 and 2 in computer training shortly and is eager to gain this valuable skill. Miles would flourish in a role driving pilot trucks or fleet maintenance within his restrictions. His attitude and personality could also make him well suited as a supervisor or a trainer for new hires. Miles is located in the Lac La Biche area. His positions of interest would be a Class 1 truck driver, doing supervision, training, pilot truck, fleet maintenance coordinator. He's looking for full-time employment and preferably weekdays only. He's fluent in English and he has a valid Class 1 driver's license. And he's been a truck driver for over 40 years. So again, lots of experience there. Additional training that he has is truck pushing, supervision, load securement, confined space entry, rigging, and he's had previous oil field tickets as well. He's able to pass a motor vehicle records check, and he has basic driving skills, computer skills. He is a worker who is up for the challenge of a new start. With a little guidance and training from the right employer, Miles will be well on his way to becoming a valuable addition to your associate or your organization. So again, reach out to ourselves, Deb or myself, or reach out to the AMTA. They're posting some information there. Thanks, Kelsey and Michelle. And if you have any questions, Deb and I are here for a couple more minutes.
Doesn't look like anything's coming in quite yet, Leanne, but
okay.
We'll give it at least another 8 seconds.
Well, kind of like bull riding, eh?
For a cowboy, that's a heck of a ride.
Yeah.
Going once, going twice, 3 times lady. All right, moving on then. I guess I'll throw it back to you, Dave.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, thank you very much, Leanne and Deborah. We'll move on to new business. We'll bounce down to 12.1 for vaccination for U.S. and domestic. Andy, I'm assuming that's coming from you?
Actually, I'm going to pass it over to Chris. Chris, are you available to take this one?
Yeah, you bet. Try to be respectful of time and not go on too long, but it is a very important topic to go with right now. So just highlighted the issue of the most recent is the talk about federal carriers having the announcement prior to Christmas about mandatory vaccination for all federal employers. So not just trucking companies, but any employer that's a federal company. So that really tacks on a lot of challenges we're experiencing in the trucking industry. Compound that with the announcement in November that in order to cross the border, the essential service exemption that we're using right now, both Canada and the US, I believe it's the 15th and 22nd, that will be going away. So even if you are an essential service, you will be required to be vaccinated to go across the border. Now, while the AMTA is a supporter of vaccination as a solution for the COVID-19 pandemic, we are conscious of the fact that when we look at our driver shortage, you know, we've got a lot of global factors to be considered to keep the supply chain strong. Unfortunately, when we look at our surveys and our uptake in industry, as recent as last week, the survey we did, we saw 66.9% uptake in vaccination. So the problem that we're going to experience on cross-border, we see about 30,000 moves a day that goes cross-border. 70% of that movement is done by Canadian carriers. The averages are similar across the board in all provinces for that. So our challenge coming up in January will be the folks that whether or not they have the time, understand, or want to move towards vaccination. But we're likely going to experience a significant impact in the supply chain cross-border, compounded with the fact that when we do move to having vaccination for all federal employers, that will create that divide to say, okay, if I'm a federal carrier, I'll work for a provincial carrier maybe, or maybe I'll exit the industry because we see labor shortages in a lot of other areas. So, you know, all of the challenges, number one problem in our industry right now, driver shortage. This, we feel we need more time to reach the drivers and reach the folks that maybe have hesitation to educate them to get them on board. So we are looking at government right now, both federally and provincially, to look at potentially have all truck drivers be exempt from this mandate, all mechanics to be exempt from this mandate, maybe for, like I said, the next 12 months. All workers primarily working outdoors to be exempt, and should the government proceed with the mandate as currently proposed, our industry would require 12 months to prepare, just to make sure we can either encourage other folks into the industry, as well as try to keep the folks that are already in the industry. You know, when we look at 4,600 drivers that let their license lapse between 2019 and 2020, all of them under the age of 55, there's a lot of contributing factors to how this can have impact. And, you know, looking at the BC floods, looking at the cross-border need, looking at everything, we just feel we need the time to reach the folks that are hesitant to take the vaccine. So that's just a quick overview of it. I know, trying to respect time, I could go in a little deeper, but I'm sure there's going to be many questions, so I want to leave the opportunity for that.
So we did actually have one question pop up. As a federal carrier, will all drivers, even not crossing the border, need to be vaxxed?
That's two situations. So it's yes. So anyone crossing the border as a commercial driver will need to be vaccinated, as well as if you are a federal employer, and even if you're not crossing the border, all employees will need to be vaccinated, fully vaccinated. So again, that's where we see the impact in our industry. We know that there's probably a little bit more in the rural areas that creates that challenge as well. So again, looking at our supply chain in Alberta specifically, that has a significant impact.
So another question, is there anything we can do to advance the J&J one-shot advantage with AHS? They don't give little or no info when these drugs available.
Yeah, I think what we can do to help there is maybe not so much, even on the Johnson & Johnson, I know there was a small amount that was brought into Canada, and I assume that's growing, but there are opportunities where our association can help guide you where you can get vaccinated as a walk-in, as well as, where you can get the appointments and accommodate trucks. We just had our vaccination buses. We worked in conjunction with Trax and the group to bring it to Edmonton, an Edmonton truck stop at Blackjacks, as well as Alderside, to be able to offer that opportunity. So reach out to our folks in our WSS. They're not doctors, but we can help to how we can make sure. And if there's a special arrangement we can make, if there's a volume of people, we'll do what we can to make sure we can support that.
Okay, I don't see anything else coming in, Chris, so thank you. Oh,
I've got one, Chris, just a really quick one. The exemption that we're asking for, is that just for the drivers or is that for the federal employees?
So to be clear, when the cross-border is specifically to drivers, however, if it's a federal mandate, which we don't have dates, we've just heard early in the new year, but announcement prior to Christmas, will be all federal employers will need to be vaccinated, likely by end of January, but they'll give enough time from the announcement. So that means all staff, no matter what role they're in, will need to be vaccinated.
But I think that answered the next question that I may have missed it, but when is this effective for compliance? And that is, we just don't know as of now.
Yeah, it's just conversation. We have written a letter to our minister and the Canadian Trucking Alliance, as well as been writing to the federal side. We've encouraged our folks at GOA to be reaching out to identify the challenges we're going to experience with that vaccination mandate. And again, don't want to confuse it. We support the vaccination. However, the timelines to implement this and the impact on the supply chain with this quick of an action, we feel is going to be detrimental.
Okay, that might be it. I don't see anything. Oh, darn it. What classifies a trucking company as a federal employer?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So essentially, if your vehicles cross a border, you're a federal carrier. However, there's a few other things in there. It's how you submit your taxes. That can probably go into our workplace support services to be able to define that. But typically, if you're a federal carrier in your status, as well as your tax allocation, that'll make you a federal carrier, and you will have to vaccinate all your staff, or okay. You will need to be.
And just to clarify, crossing borders, we were talking interprovincial borders, not necessarily crossing into the U.S.
Right. A provincial carrier does not leave the province or do any business or work outside of the province. So that's essentially what the breakdown will be. If you do work outside the province, vehicles leaving outside the province, that's when you're going to be considered a federal, not just a carrier, but a federal employer.
Brian asked, where can he find information to present to his company?
Well, for the January cross-border to U.S. information, that is public. We can get information out and put it out in the minutes. However, right now, it's still not in place for the vaccine mandate for federal employers. However, anything we do get, we will be passing along as we get it.
Chris, we released an article today, just that CTA article in the newsletter. So there is a little bit of information that we're feeding out from the CTA today, just because I know we've been in the meeting when that came out.
Perfect. Yeah, very fast moving. So
is a company considered federal if your truck doesn't cross the border, but the load does, i.e. pin switches at the border?
Again, there's probably more to it than that. It's not just based on your safety fitness. It's really based on how your company is registered as a federal entity. So, yeah. But typically the marker would be if your vehicle is bringing your equipment across a provincial or U.S. border, you'd be considered a federal carrier.
Okay, I think that we're bumping up against the 1 o'clock hour now, and I think we're going to have to limit the questions to that. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to our workplace support service folks, and they can help you out as well. So thanks for that, Chris, and I'll put it back to you again, Dave.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Chris. We'll move on to the federal 10 sick day. Sorry, I can't read the name there. Andy, who's going to be doing that for us?
I'll be doing that. My name's Rob Dombowski. I'm the HR and labor advisor industry advisor for the AMTA. So last month, the federal government proposed 10 days of paid sick leave for all federally regulated employees across all industries, including road transportation. The current situation, the legislation, section 206.61 of the Canada Labor Code entitles employees to 5 types of personal leave. So treating illnesses, carrying out responsibilities related to healthcare, taking care of education issues for kids, addressing personal urgent matters, and attending citizenship ceremony. Of those 5 leaves, employees receive 5 days unpaid leave. However, if they worked for 3 months consecutively, they were entitled to 3 days paid leave for those leaves. So legislation has been proposed. Things will change. The new legislation would be going through its second reading now, or has completed its second reading, and could come into force sometime in the new year if it's passed. I would expect by the end of Q1 2022, we'll have some idea of when this would take place, and I don't see it not passing. Fully expect that it will become something under the federal legislation. Under the current draft, and it's subject to change because it's only in the second reading, Section 206.1A is repealed, so the treatment of injury and illness, and then they created replaced Section 239-2. Essentially, an employee earns 1 day of sick leave after the first month, up to a maximum of 10 days per year at the regular rate of pay. So if you work for a full year, you accrue 10 complete days. At the end of 1 year, if you haven't used those are carried over to the following year, and you lose 1 day. Then you'll accrue another day, be at 10. So no matter what, the most you can ever have at any given time is 10. The medical leave absence can be taken in more than one period, so you can do it in 2 or 3, but at a minimum, the employer can mandate that the employee has to take at least 1 day in duration. They can't use it for half days. And the employer may ask for a doctor's note within 15 days of returning to work. And the employer can require a doctor's note for an employee who takes 3 days or more of unpaid medical leave. Now, the impact of this, in 2019, Canadian workers took off on average 8.5 sick days per year. That's nearly 1 million workers in the federal domain, which translates to 8.1 million sick days taken, if that carried through. The real financial cost to employers will be quite high. They have to carry the 10 days. And while, on the other hand, it's a benefit to the mental health and the health of the workers, there's going to be that conflict there. At the provincial level, BC has already introduced 5 days paid sick leave. Ontario tried to pass 10 days, but it didn't go through. Historically, Alberta has been a slow learner when it comes to providing employee-friendly policies, so I expect that this would kind of be adopted several years down the road. Other provinces will probably set the example. BC already has. Ontario and Quebec would probably take the lead in developing the provincial equivalents. At some points, closer to when this becomes finalized, AMTA will provide a bulletin, send that out, and then we'll be able to update you with the actual rules. So if there's any questions, please let me know.
So far, it looks fairly quiet in the chat. But as I said, we're bumping up against it. We're already beyond the limit we've set. So put them in the chat, and if we can get to them before we're done the day, or if we hit the tailgate meeting, we can probably do it then. Dave, back to you, buddy.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Rob. We'll move really quick over to the round table. Are there any items for the round table? Okay, hearing nothing. Let's review the action items.
Action items we'll put in the minutes, Mr. Chair. It's been a long meeting.
Yeah, sounds great. When is our next meeting date, Andy?
It is March 4th to 2022.
March 4th. Okay, and can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion carried.
Yeah, Robin, if you don't have anybody. There's Gary.
Outstanding. Thanks, Rob. Okay, so we'll open it up for the tailgate.
Okay, so at this point, we typically just, it's an informal conversation.